Hi, so I wanted to make a video which is going to act as an accompaniment to an article I've done just recently called Broke with Expensive Breaks, Vintage Drums on a Budget, which is all about trying to get sort of half-decent vintage drum sounds from a fairly humble setup. So about a year ago, I went around to a drummer friend of mine called Stuart Pringle, who you can find here. He's got a room where we can set up drums and record. He's also got a sound card with multiple inputs. I don't really want to focus too much on the recording in this video because I don't remember loads of details about it, and anything you need to know is detailed in the article. But the point about it is like this was a fairly humble setup. There was no £1,000 microphones or really expensive preamps or anything. It's just a fairly average setup. We pulled together our microphone collection. I think we even borrowed a couple, and we used like a Focusrite sound card. So here's the dry drum recordings as is. So as you can hear, there's nothing wrong with those at all, but I'm just going to do a little bit of work on them to get them to sound as good as I possibly can. If I just zoom out, I'll show you the whole session, so you can see we actually made, nearly 40 minutes worth of recordings, all between sort of 4 to 8, 16 bars of drums, all at different tempos. I'm quite like using Ableton as a recording platform rather than Logic. One of the things I really like is the multi-track warp function, which I'm not actually going to go into any detail right now, but there's a video on that embedded in the article, and I think that is a really awesome way of being able to tighten up multi-track recordings, so drums in particular, because if we were to warp any of the tracks individually, they would go out of phase with their other microphones. Anyway, it's a pretty simple setup. We've done a microphone on the beater of the kick, a microphone on the outside of the kick, which picks up a little bit on the bottom end. We've got a snare top and a snare bottom mic, hi-hat, and a pair of overheads. It's really simple. We also tried a room mic, but the cable was really dodgy or something like that. So just to speed through this, because I've detailed a lot more about the specifics of this in the article, but I've grouped the two kick mics into a group. So to do that in Ableton, you need to, if I just create two audio tracks, which is Command T, you can shift select them and hit Command G, and that will just lock them into a group. That way we can process them individually and we can process them as a group. I've done the same thing with the snares, and I've done the same thing with the overheads. Because you can't nest groups in Ableton, what I've then done is routed them all to a new audio track. So if I go to that audio track, where is it? There, you can see the monitor is set to in, and all of these groups have their routing to that track. So let's have a little look at what we've got going on. I'm going to start with a kick in, and it sounds a little bit like this. Nothing really wrong with it, but let's start by adding a gate, and instantly you can hear how much that's cleaned it up. See, all of this grey stuff here is what's being discarded. If we turn the gate off again, we've got a little bit of like, let's just shorten that loop a little bit. We've got all of we've got a little bit of spill from the snare and some of the toms. We're using some FabFilter Pro Q just to remove a little bit of this 140 and a bit of a high pass. We've got this Pultec style EQ. Now I have to admit I wasn't really all that familiar with the Pultec EQs until I read this article from UAD, and I would definitely recommend that to anyone who doesn't really understand how they work, because they're a little bit different to ordinary EQs. So I started off by just emulating what the guy had done with the kick drum in there, and then I sort of tweaked it to suit my purposes. It's not a huge difference, but it certainly adds a little bit more weight at the bottom end. Next we've got one of my favourite cheap plugins called Reviver by Fielding DSP, and I'm just adding third order harmonics there, which just really gives it a little bit more punch. And then lastly, a little bit of multiband transient design. And again, this is like a preset that I tweaked the trim on without it. And with it just has a little bit more punch. At this stage, what I'm really doing is just cleaning the microphones up before I start processing them. So with the kick out, we've got again some spill. It wasn't quite as bad with the gate. There are bits where the snare bleeds through a bit, but you can only do what you can do. Because the mic's further away from the source, spill's sometimes a bit harder to get rid of. I've used this low air tool, which is great for adding in bottom end. There are other things by Waves, the Renaissance bass. I kind of prefer this. I think Renaissance bass feels a little bit distorted from time to time. And then a little bit of EQ. It's dulling the sound quite a bit, but that's not a problem because that's what we want to isolate. And again, we're taking out that sort of 140. A good thing to switch off the analyzer in a live EQ when you're not using it to save a bit of CPU. Now, when we put the two kicks together, it's important to check for phase cancellation. And I sort of was convinced that they were in phase, although I'm having second thoughts now. But anyway, I've grouped those into a group, and I'm using a little bit of Eventide Ultra channel just to add some of the oppressor, which is a really nice compression, and it's quite light. It's only just sort of touching the thing, and we've got a little bit of a mid scoop and a little bit of a boost around. What's that? 6.2. A little bit of a low shelf as well. Additionally, just to get a little bit more out of this, I added in an instance of operator, and you can see here it's just looping a low note. It doesn't really matter which note. That's what it sounds like. And what I've done is on the operator, I've fixed the tuning. I tuned it to 50 hertz. Obviously, use your ears. But what I've tried to do is find the octave below the kick. And what I'm then doing is I'm using a gate to sidechain it to our kick mic. I'm using the EQ on there just to high pass that sidechain signal, just to make it a little bit snappier. Then adjust the threshold, attack, hold, and release values to get your shape. You want the attack as short as possible, really. Unfortunately, you can't have no attack, or because you get a little click to do with the phase of the waveform, which is one of the downsides of doing it this way, but it's not really a problem. So the hold and release are going to give you the length of that. You can't go too far, but those three together sound like that. And if I take the sub out, you can hear, if you're listening on decent speakers, what that sounds like with and without, and I sort of prefer it in. Moving on to the snares, the top mic is where the majority of our sound is coming from. I've got a little bit of this preamp here again from Waves. I trialled a few of them, the SSL ones and stuff, and I kind of preferred this. We've got a bit of a lift at 10k, a little bit of a dip, a boost at 700, and a little bit of a boost at 120. Again, some more reviver, which brightens it up, a little bit of smack. We've got this Focusrite compressor, which came free with the sound card, which I was surprised, but I thought it sounded quite decent. And then a little bit of Pultec EQ, a little bit of body at 300. That is, again, we checked phase with the bottom side snare, and this is one that's quite low in the mix, so we're just high passing this. With the top mic, you've got kind of the crack, and with the underside you've got the actual rattle. Again, I did the same thing with operator, where I took this time some white noise, so it doesn't matter. When you use the white noise, it disables your tuning options. Gated that to the top mic. It wasn't really necessary to EQ. This took quite a while to get the hold and release time sounding natural, and but they sound okay now to me. Some high and low pass just to box in, and then I used a little bit of reverb just to try and sort of place it in a space. I mean, this is very subtle in terms of its relative volume to the other drum mics, but I thought it just made it sound a little bit more realistic. I've taken off the chorus and monoized it. So the drum mics sound like that. And on the group, we've got some API compression in parallel. Here, it's really smacking quite hard, but and then we've got a little tiny bit of sidechain compression from the kick, just because gate wasn't so well. I tried gating these and didn't get very far. So the gate wasn't so effective. So the kick's just ducking that out of the way a little bit. And we put the kick and snare together. You can hear and see from the gain reduction meter that we've just got like a compression, short attack, and short release. Next, the hi-hat mics. I'm not always a big fan of hi-hat mics because I find they're just pretty noisy, but this one actually added a little bit of detail. I've got some FabFilter Pro Q2, which is an excellent EQ, taking a little bit of 155 out and a little bit of this 8,500. You know, normally if I was in Logic or something, I'd use a de-esser, but I tried FabFilter's de-esser and didn't really get the results I was after. I then used this distressor emulation, which I quite like. Just added a little bit of life to it. It's not, you can see from the gain reduction, it's not doing a massive amount. We've got a long attack and short release. I quite like the way that worked overall. Next, we've got our overheads. Now, I didn't do any processing on the overheads channel except check their phase. And again, I think I opted that they sounded better with the phase unflipped. But the best way to check that really is to monoize the whole mix. So if you go into your master and just throw a utility on there and drop that down to 0. So now the mix is mono. And you can flip the phase on and here it sounds a lot worse. So I decided not to flip the phase. Those overheads are panned left and right, as you can see. And on the channel strip, I've got some SSL. So this is just taking out below 150. There's not really anything else going on there, bit of a boost at 300-ish. And then I've got this this free computer called Molo or Molot. I don't know how it's pronounced by some. I think it's by like VGlad Sound or something. They're a strange. It's a strange name. So this is kind of a what would you call it? Like a very mu compressor, but I don't know really. I mean, I like it for very fast compression sounds. So what we're doing really with this is just clamping down on the snare, so that we're really getting the body of the snare in this mic, and then the transient of the snare is coming from the close mic. So with it, you can see from the gain reduction meter, it's really just clamping down on the snare. About it. So I quite like the way that sounds. As I mentioned, you can't group groups, so all of my tracks are routed to this drum mix. Now at this stage, the drums still sound fairly true to how they were recorded. Just all them together. You can see I've used some sends on, I think, the close kick and snare, and on the overhead track, and I'm using some Max for Live convolution reverb. This is the Swede plate 1 second with the decay and size increase ever so slightly. The 2 second was a little bit too long, 1 second was a bit too short. A little bit of EQing going on without it. So that was just getting the drums to a sort of reasonable stage, and they're steps I would take, you know, particularly the gating and looking at the EQ and stuff. They're steps I would take with pretty much all drum recordings. It was really what I did after that I think made them sound great. I've recently got into this compressor made by Wolfpack and Goodhertz called the Wolfpresser, and this thing is or analog noise you can add in. You've got vinyl wow sound, which we don't particularly want. We've got compression, can release off, and I really like the sound of that. I finished this off with some Boost by Sample Magic, which is another really excellent plugin. So simple, just compression, coloration, stereo, and a bit of limiting. And you can change the input and output gain. So that's it. I really like the sound of those, and what's great about this is I use the repitch algorithm for everything, so you change the tempo. And live's crashed. But yeah, that's it really. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll link through to the article, which I would suggest reading. Thanks very much.